Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Talking Niagara this morning on Wednesday, April 17th. Most unusual for me this week is that I do not have a hearing today. I've been at hearings all week, and I will be at two hearings potentially tomorrow. So it's going to be a hectic week. But with me this morning is Councillor Lori Lococo. Welcome, Lori.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm always glad to actually meet, and I was hoping that I could have gotten to speak with Mike Strange at some point during the week while Dave was off, because I wanted to follow up with him about that idea that he had about how we can run council meetings shorter.
Yes, that will definitely be a topic on April 30th. I'm not going to get into some of the research that I've done, but I will be bringing up some information on April 30th.
That's good, and I'm looking forward to seeing that, because just as a casual observer, I was saying before the show, I first watched council meeting when I believe it was Wayne Gates talking about a bridge over the QEW on Morrison, which, if my memory serves, was 2013, 2014. And don't kill me, people, if I'm wrong on that one. I'm just going by the best that I can recall. And when I first started seriously watching it was about 2015, after your first attempt to get on City Council, and I thought maybe I might think about doing that. And I would say that today it feels like those meetings are longer. Feels.
Yes.
Right?
And they might be. They might be. I do have to say that I do know I ask a lot of questions, and I ask questions for different reasons, whether it's that the information's not in the report, or I feel that the public would like to know something in particular. So it's quite important that we do ask questions. That's part of our job, and I don't think it's part of the job not to ask questions and just rubber stamp something without talking about it, even though we've read our report and have our information.
Yeah, and I wonder whether some councillors even read the report sometimes, because and I'm not poking any fingers at any individuals, but some of the comments I've heard over the time, I'm like, well, it sounds like you didn't do any research.
You know, it's really hard when you're reading all of those reports. Sometimes our agenda is about 1,000 pages. So even if you do read the report, sometimes things just don't sink in. And then when you're in council, a discussion comes up and then you might not remember. So it is hard. Yeah. It's a lot of information, a lot of different information. I always feel that I'm wearing a different hat. 1 minute it's an engineer's hat, 1 minute it's a recreation hat, 1 minute it's finance. Like you're switching gears all of the time, and these are not our day jobs or our forte. So you have to really pay attention to the topic and go through all of the information. So it is a lot of information, and I know I do put a lot of time into it to read it and do additional research as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you first got elected in 2018. What would you say that experience of having been on City Council is it been what you expected?
It's been quite interesting. You see City Council from the outside and you think you know what it is. And then once you're elected, it is different. There's a lot of facets to it, a lot of layers to it. A lot of times people only see the council meeting and then not the rest of the month or whatever we do. And some people think, oh, one meeting a month or one meeting every 3 weeks. But there's a lot more to council. I sit on a number of committees. There's reading your agenda and learning about what's going on that way, spending the time at the meeting, doing follow-up. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of other things, going to events, talking with people. So it's not just that one time or once every 3 weeks that people see. It is a little bit different. It is a huge learning experience. I think the first term really gives you an idea, because some of the things you only do once a year. So even if you go through that first year, you think, oh, okay, you've done it for 1 year, you're going to know what's happening. But some of the things you do once a year, and then some of the things you might not do They come up like 5-year plans or something like that. So you might do that once every
Yeah.
5 years.
I was intrigued by the 5-year plan and how it always seems to be. It's not the new council sorting the 5-year plan for the next 5 years. It's the end of term council doing it in almost their last year, and that's always strange to me.
Well, the way it's worked out from what I can see is like the plan for this one, we just did our strategic plan in 2022. So it's the brand new council that was
Yeah.
elected in 2022, sorry, and it was just done in 2023. And the plan is from 2023 to 2026. So it goes to the end of this term. And then when the new term comes on, they have an opportunity to change it, to add things, what has changed in our community economically or whatever. So they do have the opportunity to make some changes. And I don't know if you know, but in the last few meetings, I did ask for us to review our strategic plan, even though we just did it, because financially we're looking at some very different things that we haven't been seeing in a while. And what I wanted to do was review it because our staff are implementing what we agreed upon. So it's really...
Yeah, that's interesting because, in fact, actually, there has been a great deal of change. One of the bits of change has definitely been about the tax hikes that have occurred over the last couple of years, and that's been one of the issues. Now, Alicia Mary says it's evident that you are one of the only ones who reads the agenda. We watch every meeting. You're so prepared and pay attention to the details. The work that you put in is very much appreciated. I would love to see you as our next mayor.
Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate that. I do try to prepare myself. And going back to the strategic plan, what I wanted to do was review it because when we were talking about our fire dispatch about transferring it over to St. Catharines, we're talking about savings. Well, how can we find a savings? Then we say to staff, well, go find savings and then come back to us. I thought that was very unfair because the strategic priorities outlines the things that council want to do and a budget is attached to that. Staff just go through and implement what we told them to. So if we say go back and find some savings, we're telling them what initiatives to do. How can they go and find savings? Sure, they can find a little bit here and there, but if our priorities don't change, then we're not going to be able to change our budget.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the question is, you might find $10,000 of saving here and $10,000 of saving there, but then you end up spending $40,000 somewhere else in excess, and that kind of penny pinching doesn't, I've seen that in many councils over my time. And what tends to end up happening is the penny pinching off of a small little bits on the budget doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. We were talking about long meetings and how to make them shorter. Sometimes I find the longest discussions are on very minimal dollar amounts. And then when we have very large dollar amounts, we don't have a lot of discussion.
Everybody just has agreed.
Yes.
Sticks their hand up and says, we're agreed. Hey, let's get that one going through. Yeah. It's easy. I guess that it's easy to spend $10 million, but it's a lot harder to spend 10,000.
It all depends on what's going on and what our priorities are. And sometimes when things come to us halfway through the year, we do have some reserves that we can dip into. But then if something comes up that's unexpected, where do we find that? And we can't keep adding items throughout the year unless we have a buffer, a reserve to do that. So we have to be very cautious about that.
Yeah. So what do you see as the priorities right now for Niagara Falls, irrespective of whether the city can deliver them?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of things going on right now. I'm going to touch on a few. Right now, the official plan, we're looking at updating our official plan. And what that is looking at the vision for the next 20 years. So it's a big plan. And there's a lot of communication going on right now, consultation, open houses, feedback, surveys. We want to know what the residents want to see for Niagara Falls in the next 20 years. This is a mandatory document that we have to have. We work from the province and from the region, and now it's our time to review it. So there's lots going on. Where do you want to see development? Where do you want? Go ahead.
Part of the challenge there is, of course, well, you and I might see the same thing because we live in the same general area, but somebody who lives on the other side of town may see things differently than we see them. We might both be saying, hey, there's not enough development of this and that and the other downtown, and then people on the other side of the city are saying, no, downtown gets more than its fair share of whatever it is we're talking about. We need to open a swimming pool here, or whatever it is, you know.
Yeah, that's why it's important when you're getting the feedback, you're looking at what is the demographic of that feedback. Is that a person who is 20 years old living in the south end of Niagara Falls, or is that a person who's 65 living in downtown? So a lot of times when you get the feedback, you can put your postal code, and then there might be some age questions or demographic questions, and that really gives us an idea. And, you know, we're looking at things about protecting our agricultural land, protecting our environmental heritage features. So we're looking at a lot of different things, and we only have so much land left. What do we want to do with it? So right now, that's one of the big things is our official plan. What do people want to see?
Yeah, and I kind of sometimes drive past that. I go up to Upbridge and I head along Stanley towards the north end, and I come to that corner where the Gale Centre is in the background. And I think to myself at that corner, hey, we need a store. We need a store like a Walmart here, because Walmart for us is such a long distance. It's a 15-minute drive down to that end of town. And sometimes I just think, hey, we need that right here.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting when you think about that. You say this maybe this store's not there. We need something like that in a particular neighborhood. So there's different things that the city can do. A lot of times when we have developers or businesses that want to come to Niagara Falls, you start the conversation, they look for places to go. Sometimes we can suggest having a store in a certain place and they will go there, but realistically it's an independent business that they choose where they'd like to go. You know, the cost of the rent, the number of people. So we can say, yes, we'd like to have a grocery store downtown, but if we don't have a business that is willing to open up downtown, it's a little hard.
That's one of the problems about city planning per se, because I know of people, I had friends when I was young who went to, they decided they wanted to become a city planner. And when I remember speaking to them 10 years after they'd become a city planner, they said, there's no such thing as city planning. We're literally controlled by any developer that comes in, and we have an idea that we want to build, let's say, a new development in a particular location. We want to build these shops, a mall in a particular location, but the developer comes in and they want it over there.
A lot of times when a developer comes in, by the time it comes to council, it's already been with our staff for 1 or 2 years in a planning stage, a pre-consult stage, and we don't know what it is until it comes to council. So there are some opportunities when, say, a developer comes and they want to build houses. Maybe we can talk to them about some of the types of houses that we need. And that was going to be my next topic, was affordable housing. Now, I know the word affordable housing is a definite challenge. Years ago, affordable housing used to be spending less than 30% of your income on your housing, and that was to include your utilities as well. That was a social services definition of affordable housing, like through Ontario Works or Ontario Disability Support Program. So that was the definition, but things have definitely changed. What is affordable? Now we have this new word, attainable housing. In 2018 and 2019, the City of Niagara Falls worked on a housing strategy report, and we worked with a consultant to find out the needs of Niagara Falls, the needs of our individual residents, what were the incomes. And I don't have all of the figures in front of me, but the one that really sticks out to me is that almost 50% of our households in Niagara Falls make less than $60,000 household income.
Well, I was discussing that, funnily enough. In fact, got the statistics. I wish I had them up. I got the statistics of the average wages that individuals earn rather than the average wages that families make in an area. And the average wage across Ontario is about 68,000, and the average wage in Niagara region is about 35.
And Niagara Falls is even less than the Niagara region or the provincial. And the reason why we look at household is because you combine your funds together either to get a mortgage.
I grant that.
Yeah, so that's why they look at the under 60,000 per household, and that's almost 50%. When you look at this affordable housing definition that we're using, the average for a house price, for affordable house price, brand new house, is $539,000. It's very difficult right now to find a house for $539,000. We're around there, about sort of the average, but the majority of people can't afford that because that requires about $119,000 income per year.
Yeah, and one of the challenges about that is that also, if you look at the rental end of the market, people used to be paying in the Niagara region, for a one bedroom was typically about 800 to 1,100 about 7 or 8 years ago. For a two bedroom was about 1,100 to about 15, and about 1,400 to 2,000 for the three bedroom places. And if you were lucky, you even got some that were lower than those brackets. But now we are up to 2 or 3 times that amount. And the problem here is that local people from the Niagara region who work and have lived in this Niagara region, particularly those that are in the tourist sector, their wages haven't gone up.
No, and that is the problem. I did bring up our affordable housing report at our last meeting to ask us to review it and discuss it, because almost every development application that's coming to us, we're talking about affordable housing. We have 3 brand new councillors, and they're questioning, and we're questioning, well, what is affordable? $539,000 for a house at $119,000 per year of household income is not the reality for most.
It's not the reality here.
It's not. So what is Niagara Falls going to look like? Is it going to attract people from other municipalities to come here and buy houses? Yes, that's what's happening, and that's okay. We need to grow, but if our affordability can't be sustained for our residents, we have a problem. So, like I said, I did bring it up, and I'm not saying that we're changing it. These were statistics and a plan that was put together a few years ago that is completely not jiving with the figures about what's going on today. So we definitely need to look at it.
And I have to wonder, actually, when we're looking at certain parts of, there's a new section of town where literally most of the growth we seem to have in Niagara right now seems to be in the southwest of the city, west of the QEW.
Really, that's the only place that we have left for the growth.
Yeah.
We have some pockets, but sure.
Yeah, I was talking to Adam Hyde last week about that, and we were saying that, hey, there's a lot of people who live out there that I bet some of those people have never actually been to Niagara Falls. What I mean by Niagara Falls, they've never seen the waterfall, because they live out there, they came from somewhere else, and they currently work somewhere else. So they're driving, their typical day is get on the QEW and get out of here.
Yes. One of the other issues that comes with that is Niagara is a very high concentration of single detached homes. And a lot of other municipalities have townhouses, duplex, fourplex, triplex. We have a lot of single family homes. They've changed the term now. It's not single family, it's single detached homes. And what that does is you have less of them and you need more. We need more housing. And a lot of the developers that come in want to build the single detached home. And those are even changing over the years. It's not just a single family. Now what's happening is it could be multi-generational. The mother and father and kids might live on one level, and then maybe on another level you have their parents or their children that are living there. So things are changing, and I think we need to, as a city, we need to guide the developers to say, we don't want all of those single detached homes. We don't need all of those single detached homes. What about building a different type of home, maybe smaller on smaller portions?
Well, yeah, and I know you've brought up the concept of tiny homes on a number of occasions, but I also know that you've often talked about them on the affordability concept, whereas many of those that actually want tiny homes are actually, there's a movement out there of tiny home people that are not interested in affordability, they're interested in lower carbon footprint.
The word tiny homes has definitely changed over the years. At the beginning, it was having a smaller footprint, living off of the grid, that sort of thing. The word tiny homes has now changed to micro homes, affordable homes. It's a smaller unit. And what the city has done, and even what the province has done, for every home that you parcel that you have, you can have up to 3 units. And they're called accessory dwelling units, ADUs. So say if I have my home here, I could have a legal second unit in my house to rent out as long as it meets all of the building and fire requirements. And then I could also have a third unit out in the backyard as long as it meets the setback units to your neighbor and behind you and all of that. So you could have three sets of people living on
So
one
yeah,
lot.
so I could separate and rent out my basement, or subdivide my house, not necessarily the basement, but you could subdivide your house such that you could have a duplex essentially in your house.
And that's
and
as of right.
build a back garden unit of some kind. So probably like a 1-bedroom unit or something like that.
Yeah, that unit, they're called garden units, garden suites, alley suites, tiny homes. It's usually a smaller unit, and one person can live in it, maybe 2 people. But what our city is looking at doing is having pre-approved designs, so that it would cut down the amount of time that you'd have to go through for planning and building and all, getting all of the plans and approvals. So we might have, say, 5 or 6 pre-approved designs, and as long as it fit in your backyard with the setbacks, then you can say, okay, I want that one. Now you've cut down a lot of the planning part and the building and the permits, and then you can get that unit done faster.
Yeah, I was going to say, so pre-approved designs is actually something the federal government has been talking about, in terms of let's get 50 or 50, 60 kind of designs for homes, where there's an architectural plan. Because if you want to build homes quickly, one of the important factors there is about how you design them.
Correct. Yeah.
And therefore, and everybody's been talking about the wartime, the reappearance of the wartime home. But I don't believe it's the reappearance of a wartime home. I believe it's, the idea is that you can have standard pre-designed homes that the government approves, and therefore all the levels of government have approved, because they will have worked with the provinces, they will have worked within municipalities in order to say, what approvals do we need for this home and how can we shortcut it?
Yeah, it's a good way to look at cutting down the amount of time, and that's why they're pre-approved as long as they fit within yours. And what we're now seeing is micro units within apartment buildings. So maybe an apartment used to be, I don't know, 1,200 square feet. Well, now they're cutting them down to maybe 500 square feet, 700 square feet to get smaller units. They are more affordable now, but they're smaller, so you can only have so many people living in it, that sort of thing. But that's how we're getting more affordable units, is the smaller. So going back to the tiny homes, years ago when tiny homes came out, it was a whole bunch of little tiny homes in a community. That's one way of doing it, but the concept of a tiny home is maybe infill. So maybe there's somebody, an empty lot next door to you that the house.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm seeing that as a potential. There's a few lots around our general area that have been on the corners. There used to be a lot which has now been for many years, that was on Second and Maple, that was open for many years. It's now recently had a couple of houses put on there. But when you first started talking about affordable homes and tiny homes, I thought that was an ideal lot, that you could possibly get about 5 or 6 tiny homes on them.
Right. And then tiny homes was also used for unsheltered people who didn't have homes. It could be a community for unsheltered.
That's a concept they've built in St. Catharines. They put it together very quickly. I forget the address of it, but Dave and I talked about that about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and they had this ready for February. They first put it up in, I think, December. They got the plot of land, and
Yes.
they got all the approvals, and the city did their best in getting this done so they could start housing people in February.
Yeah.
It was only about 40 units, but 40 units is 40 units.
Right. Yeah. And going back to the tiny homes, it's definitely changed how people are using tiny homes. It's not just for unsheltered people, unhoused people, it's people's homes. And the Niagara region is looking at building up instead of out. Tiny homes, if you're looking at for unsheltered, can expand this way, and we only have so much land, and it's so expensive to go this way. So a lot of regions are going this way, going up instead of. So it has changed.
Yeah, and for example, if you look at many of the larger cities, a lot of the development tends to be upwards, right?
Yes.
We may have a large amount of land in Canada, but when it comes to where the majority of our people reside, we only still have a restricted amount of land. So that question about going up, and I know that you put in that approval for what's called Niagara 77, although according to the press that seems to have died a death.
I don't know if it's died a death. A lot of times, as I say, it takes years for things to come to council, then we approve it, and then we might not hear about it afterwards. But yes, and there's a balance, because we're in Niagara Falls. We have a lot of tourism activity as well, not just residential. And that's where we differ from a St. Catharines. And St. Catharines has an issue right now. They don't have a lot of land. They don't have a lot of developable land that they do have to build up. So we have to be very cautious about what we build.
And actually, that St. Catharines also has a question. Whilst there is a gaping great hole in the middle of their city where the GM plant used to be, of course, that is poisonous land, right? And we have the same problem here with the cyanamide, the old former cyanamide plot.
Yes, you can only build on some of the lands. You can only clean it up to, say, a commercial level. So the Gale Center is on that land. It's commercial. It got cleaned up to a certain point. If you're going to have people live on it, it needs to be cleaned up to a different level. So some of the pieces of property throughout the city, they might have had different things on them before. Can you clean them up to a residential level? Some of them you can, some of them you can't. So you have to look at that as well. And
that is of course a big challenge. We talked about we've talked about a lot about housing to date. All right. I want to basically say, okay, so for you, when if today were a council meeting day, how does that unfold for you?
Well, usually I've read all my material before council day. I usually go through it once, do a whole bunch of research. Then once I'm completely finished after all of the updates, I go through it again. Council day, I go through my notes again. I have a 2-book system for council. I have one book that I do all of my work in. I write down important things that are in the report, and I write down my questions. And then I have a second book, so when I'm at council, I'm writing in that second book. So day of council, I'm going through all of my my notes again. If I have to connect with somebody that I haven't been able to connect about certain questions, or I need answers, there's that. I try not to have any appointments that day, because it does, it
So
does.
if I'm ringing your phone and say, hey Laurie, I've got a problem, I need to come see you right now, the answer is likely to be no, I'm sorry, I'm preparing for city council.
Usually yes, and I will
Yeah.
ask them, can it wait? If it's something urgent, I can connect them. It all depends too, if I'm reading my agenda and going through, sometimes I'll just let the call go to voicemail and I'll pick it up later. But I really try to leave that open. I want to have a free and clear mind for the topics that are on the agenda. As I said, you're always wearing a different hat. And it's a lot of information to keep in your head about all of these different things. So I want to make sure that I'm keeping it all straight. When you have multiple developments in front of you too, you don't want to confuse the developments or what's going on.
Do you go to the locations often?
It depends. When I'm first reading the agenda, I look at the map first, that's included in
Got you.
there, so I can see where it is. Then usually I will Google it on my phone, because sometimes I might not be able to get an exact location just by looking on the map. So I'll Google it on my phone. If I have more questions, I will go, but I think as I'm getting more used to the development, I don't go out as often as I used to understand. Now I'm understanding what's going on. If there's a
Yeah,
lot of
I get you.
residents that are opposed to something, I might go out and meet the residents and talk to them and discuss what's going on.
So if for example, I don't know, just you might get a flurry of letters about a proposed development in an area, and that's the point when you're kind of going, okay, I perhaps ought to go see these people.
Yes, and there's one more opportunity. So before it gets to council, there's usually an open house.
Yeah.
And the open house notification is sent to council, so we know them ahead of time. So I look at them when I get them, and I usually don't spend a lot of time at that particular time looking at the development, because when it comes to council, it might be different. Usually an open house is to get residents' opinions and ideas. Sometimes the developer changes their development based on that. So that's why I don't spend a lot of time at the open house stage. Unless there's a big controversial development, then I would go to the open house to listen to what the residents are saying, so I
Yeah.
know what's going on. And which ones are a little bit more controversial when they come up.
Yeah, and I was going to say some of these, sometimes what happens is I've been to a couple of open houses for developments that have occurred in areas that I'm, interested in. And when they put them up, when they put the proposal up to council, it's often changed a lot from what I saw at the open house. And
Definitely.
I was quite surprised at that. And because I was always one of these people that assumed that most of these developers don't want to listen to local people. They're
I think
from Ottawa or Toronto, or what would they know about Niagara Falls? They're just putting a building up.
Well, I think that most developers want to have less controversy. They want to have a good build, and they want to make money. They want to house people. As I said, that the developers are working with our staff well before it comes to council. Our staff work with them based on good planning principles. They work with them and tell them, okay, well, maybe we could do this. Let's change this, move this. It will look aesthetically better, or it will be more environmentally friendly, or we could do, plant more trees or have more green space. All of that is done before it comes to council. And then once it comes to council, there might even be some more ideas. And we've often changed things on the fly during the meeting. Some things you can do that, some things you can't. So it's, when you're looking at a development application, you're looking at a lot of things. You want to please the people who live in the neighborhood. You want to please the people who are going to purchase into this new development. You want to think about affordable housing. You want to think about saving the environment, having green space, having trees. I'm always cautious about cutting all of these trees down and then planting a couple of trees that are, 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years old and this big. So we want to, consider that as well. Are there environmental features?
Well, in fact, actually, one of the complaints that people who believe that we're going through climate change always seem to complain about is the fact that we have fewer trees, particularly in our cities, than we ever did before. And a lot of the proposals that they make to various cities around the world is that, hey, we don't mind developing places, houses, even commercial places, just make sure you surround them with trees.
Trees are very important. It's really nice that we have a replacement. If you cut down a tree that you need to plant 2 in its place, that's great.
Yeah.
I think we can even do more, but I think we really need to focus on keeping the trees that we have. They've been there for a long time. There's so much benefit to it. I've brought up having a tree bylaw in Niagara Falls, and it's been voted down a couple of times, and it's always back in the back of my head about how can I bring it up again.
One of the things I would like to see is behind me, there's a proposal when it happens, which is probably about 2 years away right now, is for the Thoroldstone Road extension. And one of the things I would love to see on the edge of that is don't build these concrete blocks on them. Let's get away from the concrete blocks. Let's have lines of trees down the edge of that Thoroldstone Road extension. There won't be houses on that extension, but buffer the noise somehow by putting trees in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something definitely that we need to look at, and that's going to be a region road. So it's a project between the region and the city.
Granted, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
But again, if those sort of simple things that you could put trees, it's not like there's a footpath, and even if there is a footpath there, it's like what is going to end up happening is you're going to have a road there that's cut through bare land, primarily bare land. There's not going to be housing on either side of that road, and where there is some commercial development, for example, the Gales gas bar that's going to be redeveloped there, those can have trees surrounding it. And so we can put the trees along that route. And in fact, trees help clean up the exhaust from cars anyway.
Yes, we definitely need to be more mindful in what we build, where we build, what trees we keep, what trees we plant, what types of trees. It's important that we have native species. It's important for permeable surfaces instead of just having an asphalt parking lot that the runoff. So we need to be looking at these types of things to preserve our environment.
Yeah, and we have seen a reduction in the numbers of trees, that's for sure, over the years.
Yeah.
Right. Every new development, as you say, there's a wooded I've seen some instances, and I'm not saying here necessarily, where wooded patches have come down where they've had 50, 60 trees in a couple of acres. And what you get is a new development up there. And then, as you say, a nice block of 50 units, which deals with the housing issue, but you got 4 trees on the lot.
And a lot of times what happens is the developers will plant the tree, and then there's no maintenance afterwards.
Yeah.
So those trees end up dying. So those are things that the city can look at, as well as a maintenance plan about who waters the tree, how long they have to take care of the tree in order for the tree to live.
Well, and some of the other aspects is that in some other parts of the world, they actually go through a lot where you're building and there are markers put on trees that basically mean thou shalt not touch this tree. And if
Right.
you do, there's like $1 million penalty type thing. And that's something I'd love to see us do.
With a lot of the larger developments, there's usually a tree preservation plan, which sometimes I sort of smile and laugh at. The tree preservation plan is not to preserve the trees, it's just to count the number of trees and take down the trees that they need, and then get a number of what they've taken down in order to implement what's there. Sometimes the trees are on the lot line or on somebody else's property. So there's a lot of stuff to look at, but I think we can definitely be doing better. And to do that, it would be a tree bylaw, and our city does not have one. There's lots of cities that do. They have some great tree bylaws that we can take bits and pieces to build our own tree bylaw, but our council has not approved that.
One of the thoughts about a tree bylaw that occurs to me as you're talking about a bylaw is, realistically, other than the cost of creating the bylaw in the first place, there is not a lot of cost in terms of building, planting and maintaining trees. It's really having rules in place about how one should manage the tree population of the city.
Correct. And we are in the process of looking at our tree canopy in the region, and we're looking at our tree canopy here in Niagara Falls as well. And keeping the existing trees is part of that. It's nice to plant new trees, but we need to keep the trees that we have. Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you, Peter, is about the MAT, the municipal accommodation tax. Back in January, when we had our budget, I was talking about the MAT. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce, in their materials, say that a municipality can have up to 50% of the funds that come from the MAT. And right now, there's a $2 charge per room per night. The Niagara Falls Hotel Association, they collect that. It's all on a voluntary reporting basis. All of that money comes to the city of Niagara Falls. What we budgeted for 2024, just to give you some very round numbers, is almost $4 million of money coming into the city. The city takes a 5% administration charge, so that's about $200,000. And then we give back the rest of it to the Niagara Falls Hotel Association. And what they do with the money is to promote tourism to come to Niagara Falls.
And in that regard, that also applies, as I understand the rules, because I've looked into the MAT, is that it applies to all Airbnb rooms that exist, short-term rental rooms, campgrounds, and a whole wide range of
correct, yes,
things you may stay.
I did bring that up as well, that our process is not quite there yet. We are not including the majority of the short-term rentals, the VRUs. That is something that we have to move towards to get that.
Well, sorry, go on.
But the idea behind this, Matt, is that the city could take up to 50% of it, but it has to be to promote tourism. So at the last council meeting, Councillor Baldinelli brought up a motion for us to look into all of these different things after I talked about it in January. And if we can have up to 50%, I'm not saying it needs to be 50%, but maybe a lot more than 200,000 for administration. So I was wondering what was on our current budget to promote tourism. So when you look at that, years ago, we used to spend money on fireworks, we would spend money on concerts, and the residents were upset that their tax dollars were going to tourism. They felt that tourism should pay for tourism. So we took that out of our budget and did this MAT, and then that was supposed to cover it. But
that's an interesting question, because, for example, if you were to take some of what the mayor does, and the mayor's job includes a portion of it that is about promoting tourism.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Could that pay for some of those kind of things that he does to promote tourism?
It could. We would have to look at it. We would have to be very specific about what that money could be used for. But I did look at our current budget to see, well, what is a tourism promoted initiative? One of them was sports tourism. It was only $20,000 comparison to 4 million. So it's not a lot of money in comparison, but there was that. And then there's also a music strategy. The music strategy, we received a government grant to put the music strategy in place. And there's two prongs to the music strategy. One, to promote tourism, to bring people to our city, and two, to promote local artists. So if that is going to come into our budget next year, because we got the grant to implement the study, then you would implement it the following year. If that is going to come into our budget, then that is promoting tourism, and we would be able to use the MAT for that. And then I think there's a lot more discussions that can come about that. The idea, I just really want to get this out. The idea is that residents tell us they understand tourism and we're here because of tourism. A lot of people benefit from tourism, but we'd like to get some other benefits from having all of our tourists here. And if we can benefit from that money that's coming into the city, then the residents can get a benefit that way. So why not use some of that money for our residents? So as long as it's promoting tourism, we can use that. So we're going to be discussing that in the next few council meetings about the MAT. There's an agreement with the Niagara Falls Hotel Association. When I read the agreement, it said that it needed to be reviewed after 5 years. That was January of 2024. So my question was, did we review it? I didn't get an answer, but that we'll be looking at that.
Okay. And Mike makes the point of we promote tourism already. So is this double spending? And I think you were saying, no, it isn't, but you're looking at ways that can we rearrange our budget in some way. And I like that. And he's saying, and this is where obviously the law doesn't permit it, MAT should go to the city, not for tourism, but for infrastructure like police, fire departments, etc. But the law is very specific about how that money should be spent.
Yeah, the Municipal Act is very specific. When the municipal accommodation tax, it's a tax, it's not a fee. You might go to a hotel that has a different fee, like maybe a resort fee or whatever they want to call it. That's a fee. They're allowed to charge whatever fees they want. This is a tax that goes through the government, and there's very specific guidelines. So it has to be to promote tourism. It would be wonderful to use it for infrastructure, for the roads and fire, because we have 12, 14 million visitors that come. They're using our roads, they're using our infrastructure, but that's not what the Municipal Act allows the MAT to be used for.
Yeah. And the Municipal Act in this particular case is extremely specific.
Very specific, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the other questions that I want to move on to is Niagara Regional Transit. That moved in last year to region-based, region-controlled, and there's been a lot of discussion over whether that was a wise move.
As you know, I've brought it up many times at council. When we agreed to the transition from having the transit at the city to go to the region, we were told that it would be a 0% increase for 5 years. And the reason behind that was that we gave all of our assets, I don't want to confuse, 29 million or 39 million. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact figure, but we handed over all of our buses, all of our vans, our cars, our fare boxes. We handed over all of those assets, and it's based on the Cummings principle that if you're merging and you give assets, then there's a certain time period that you wouldn't have an increase to pay for it, because that's your contribution of handing over your assets. So it was supposed to be 0% for 5 years. In that time when we were negotiating and going through all of this, there was the pandemic. The pandemic really changed our ridership level. It changed our revenue coming in. So there was some discussion from the region that it would go from 0% to, I think, 7%. And that was just before we were supposed to get our tax bill. When we got our tax bill, the transit amount was absolutely crazy. It was very, very high. And I started asking questions. Well, what is this increase? I want to know what the increase was. So usually the city would get a gas tax rebate from the government, and we
Yeah.
would apply that rebate to lower the cost for our residents for transit. And that's how we applied it. There was another way you could apply it, and that's what the region did. They used it for their infrastructure, for their capital, instead of for the operating. So it
Oh,
didn't affect the cost for the consumer or the resident. So I said, well, what is this increase? If I have my numbers correct, I think it was 26% increase without using the gas tax subsidy, or it was 46% without using the subsidy for the operating. So I said it was supposed to be 0. Then it went to 7%, 7 point something. Now it's 26 or 46. So at 2 different times, I've brought up motions that our city talk with Niagara Region Transit and the region, because this isn't what we signed up for. And
yeah.
if there were changes because of the pandemic, okay, we can all agree that that happened, that definitely affected it. Then I think we need to have some further discussions moving forward. I feel like right now we're just at the pleasure of Niagara Regional Transit, that they can charge whatever they want, and we really have no say in it.
Yeah. One of the challenges of transit is that we live in a world whereby we've talked much on this show about the increasing in carbon tax, and how certainly Mike Cushman and myself are in agreement that, generally speaking, if you want to get people out of cars, which is the intent of the carbon tax, is that what you've got to do is provide alternatives first. And part of the challenge that we face in the Niagara region, somewhere like Toronto, there's no big deal about public transit because it already exists, right? There is already, could you improve it? Of course, right? But generally speaking, people can get where they need by public transit a lot easier. I looked at this situation. I had to take my car in recently because of something that occurred on it. The dealership basically said, sorry, we can't get it back to you tonight because we ordered a part, and the part won't get here till tomorrow morning. And essentially, I therefore was like, okay, I'm in St. Catharines, how do I get home? And I looked at the bus. Well, the first thing that occurs to me is that the bus there was a 6 o'clock and a 7 o'clock from St. Catharines to Niagara Falls. So I then looked at what the Niagara Falls transit situation was, and lo and behold, from the Dorchester Morrison hub, which I think is the craziest place in the world for there to be a hub, but let's not go there, right? There's no buses back to my part of the city after 5:30.
Yes.
And I'm thinking to myself, we live in a 22-hour city, not a 24-hour city, and there's a crucial difference there. Because people are starting work at 5, at 5 or 6 in the morning, and our night hours go on till 3 or 4 in the morning. So we live in almost a 24-hour city, but not quite. Yet we don't have the transit to reflect it.
Yes, transit is a very difficult being. When you look at the city of Niagara Falls, we amalgamated a whole bunch of smaller towns and cities to be Niagara Falls, so we're very expansive. And transit wasn't perfect when we had it. It's all about money. It's about hours. It's about timing. Is it once every 30 minutes, once every 15 minutes, once an hour? You have to look at all of that, and that's a cost. So we had a certain level of standard when we owned the transit. When it went over to Niagara Regional original transit, they were supposed to keep the standards at the same level of service. The fares were supposed to stay the same. They've talked about increasing the fares. They've changed some of the timings of the buses. When our hospital is built, our buses are supposed to go out there. That's definitely going to be an increase. I did bring that up as part of my motion to start having that discussion now. So when we owned our transit, we would just make the change to go for the bus to go to the hospital. Now that the Niagara region owns it, now we'll have to have discussions with them, and that will come at a cost. Not that there wasn't a cost when we owned it, but now we have a third party who will be
and that
scheduled.
adds to the problem, because now you build a new development. It doesn't really matter where you build the new development. You use the hospital example, and that's a fine example. And you start planning for those sort of changes probably 5 years before the hospital even comes into fruition. So the bus route may not yet exist, but what you have to also consider is that along the route may well be residential areas that also need service, and those are changing all the time as well.
Yes, and where it's situated, there is new development coming out there. So a bus does
Exactly.
go out halfway there, but now we need to get all the way there. And because it is a regional hospital with regional bus, we would have to have buses coming from Welland to come to the hospital, from Port Colborne, from Fort Erie, because people need to get to the hospital. So there's all those things to consider, but I definitely think that there's a bigger opportunity to have discussions about what happened and what is coming up in the future. This is year 2 now of this transition, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the percentage. I think it was 14% that it went up for transit this time. Actually, sorry, it was 5.5% for residential owners, and it was 14% for commercial and industrial. So again, that's not zero. Was the idea after the pandemic that there would be like one big year hit and then we would go back to normal. But now we're 2 years into this agreement and it's not 0%.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people around Niagara that basically just are concerned whenever our budget goes up. You add money onto our budget, and of course, I'm not. There are always people who will say, "Yeah, I don't use the buses. Why the heck am I paying for the buses?" Right?
Right.
I don't take that attitude. Yes, it's true that I'm not generally a bus user. I like to see that, I'm a person who's a realist and say, not everybody has the privilege that I have in order that I've got a car. I feel myself lucky that I've got a car, but I also look at the fact that, hey, what happens if suddenly I don't have a car?
This past year going through the budget was a very difficult year. It was difficult last year as well. Nobody wants to increase taxes. Nobody wants to increase and pay more for something. But realistically, everything that the city is purchasing, that the city has to use, is going up. So it would be very difficult for us to say, we're spending more on all of these different things and then not include that in the tax increase for our residents.
Yeah, and part of the problem that you've got, of course, is that every project that you do, suddenly, like, we know the cost of materials, the cost of food, the cost of everything
Labor,
you buy, the cost of labor is all going up. And at the point, we're in the situation whereby, you've just entered, let's say, $1 million contract with an organization to do something. Well, suddenly now they're coming back and saying, no, that's not $1 million anymore. It's 1.7.
Yeah. So it is difficult. Before we go, I just wanted to let everybody know that I'm going to have an open house or a town hall, whatever you'd like to call it, on May the 30th at 6 p.m. at the Lions Club on Drummond Road. That's May 30th at 6 p.m. It's an open house town hall. I will be promoting it before then, obviously, but I wanted to let you and your viewers know it's just an open format. Come with your questions, come with your concerns.
Oh,
If there's anything that I can help or investigate or get some information, bring up to council, I definitely want to hear from people and give people an opportunity to come out and talk.
okay. That's the same place as we had the ward meeting, isn't it? Like
Correct. Yes.
2 years ago. Yeah,
Yes.
that's actually, so that's good. May 30th, 6 p.m. at
Correct.
Drummond. Yes, absolutely. Very important. And I wish you well with that one, because I think that one of the things that we've had, you're doing something that's breaking the mold because you're speaking with people. And I think that we've got, generally speaking, when I went out on the campaign trail 2 years ago, I got the feedback that nobody's ever knocked on my door before.
It's hard in an at-large system. It definitely is. You think about knocking at every single door in Niagara Falls. That is a huge feat.
Yeah.
And you have to be very thoughtful in where you spend your time, where you spend your money. If you have support in certain areas, do you go back there to shore up the support, or do you go to new places and try to get new people to support you? Timing, the distances to walk or drive. There's a lot of things that you look at. So I really feel when people say nobody's ever come to my door, but as a candidate, it's almost impossible to get to every single door in Niagara
And
Falls.
yeah, and I just tried to do a widespread. So my lowest number was about 2,078. I went down right up in the north in north of Stanley. I was in some of those blocks up there. My highest number was in the 11,000s down in Chippewa, down in the reaches of Chippewa and out on the outer stretches. And then there also is, when you're going out to those kind of places, well, if it's 3 or 4 or 5 minutes between places, what's the balance? And every vote matters, but what's the balance of driving time versus speaking to people time?
Yeah, you have to factor that in. You want to talk to
Yeah.
people, but you can't talk to everybody for half an hour. What you can do sometimes is give them a card and say, I'd like to speak to you further on this, follow up with them. But it's important to get your name out there, get to talk to the people, to understand what their concerns are and how you can bring their concerns forward.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the concerns probably that are going to be at the next election are going to match onto some of the concerns we've had. The continued rise in homelessness probably being one of the biggest ones, and that, of course, is intricate to the homelessness question. Is, of course, the question of affordable homes, that whole affordability issue. And Dave keeps saying, for example, he's saying his children can't afford a home when he was kind of 5 years younger than they are today, and he bought a home when he was young. That's a question of that's a definite problem that we have in our society.
We're definitely at a tipping point with mental health, addiction, the economy, homelessness. You bring all of those together. This just isn't a Niagara Falls issue. It's an issue that's happening all across the world in different instances, across the country, and everything has just culminated to this point. The pandemic threw a lot of issues in. So I get a lot of people that contact me that say, Niagara Falls is going downhill. We have a lot of homeless people. We have a lot of addiction and mental health. It's not just Niagara Falls. I want to help every person that I can and every group that I can, but it's not a specific issue. And when we're in a two-tier government like we are here in Niagara, Niagara Region is the provider for homelessness, mental health, and addiction. The city, the lower tier, is not necessarily the provider for those. So we
But they
step up.
suffer the worst.
They suffer the worst, but we step up. These are our residents. We want to take care of them, but we only have so much money for so many different things that fall under our purview. So we're working very closely with the region, and we've done a lot of good things, like the bridge housing on Victoria Avenue, the shelter
Absolutely.
on Summer Street. The region has stepped up and done a lot of things. We are working towards that, but there are certain issues that we just can't control. Crime, the policing, we have to come up with better solutions. And right now, a lot of us are just looking at them, wondering what to do about it. So it definitely is a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you for coming this morning, Lori. It's been wonderful to go through a lot of these issues with you. And I think the whole thing is just in that final statement, whole question about policing is a grave concern to a lot of people, as is homelessness. And we didn't really chat much about homelessness. We talked about the other end of it, which was the development of new homes. And that's an important factor. But there is so much that one can pack into an hour that, it's very difficult to actually, we could go on for 3 hours and still not cover every problem we've got.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been great. And anytime that you'd like to have me back, I'd be more than happy to come back.
All right. Thank you very much and have a great day, Lori.
Thanks, Peter. Take care.
Okay. Bye, everybody.